All right, so far for the past 3 days, we've been writing raw SQL, which is we've been creating tables, we've been inserting data, we've been writing SQL queries, or writing queries to extract data from the database. But we can do something that's a little more scalable, because what if we had some data or some seed data that we'd have to like input like 1,000 lines of insert into queries? That would take a long time to like write all that data or write all those SQL queries, like insert into like 1,000 times just to insert some data into. But we're Python developers, we're JavaScript developers. We're lazy. We don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. So let's like write some scripts to do all this kind of stuff for us. The first thing we need to do is actually somehow connect to our Postgres database using Python. And there is a specific Python library out there called, I don't even know what it's pronounced. It's called Psycopg2 or Psycopg2 or something like that. I think we call it Psycopg2. And this is a Python library or Python module that allows us to connect to our Postgres database and execute commands on it or execute queries on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop Platoon, drop DB. So what I'm going to do, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a Popl Platoon database, and I'm going to use Psycopg2 to run queries on it and insert data into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is create DB Popl Platoon. I'm going to PSQL Popl Platoon. All right. There's no tables in there because I literally just created it. Great. So I'm going to use Python to create our tables and insert some data into it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a Python file just called touch class roster.python. And I'm going to open that right here. So before I do anything in Python, when I install modules, third-party libraries or third-party modules, there's one thing I have to do before that. So where in JavaScript, I can just do npm install, what is it? Jest, like so, just straight up here. In Python, what I want to do is create what is called a virtual environment, which essentially creates a small bubble, like a bubble around my little program where I can install all kinds of crap into it, all kinds of libraries and everything. And whatever installed in that virtual environment won't affect anything else outside of my on my computer. It's like a small virtual environment that I can do whatever I want in that virtual environment, and it won't affect any other libraries, any other modules, or any other applications outside of that virtual environment. Any questions about that? Has anybody seen the Seinfeld episode Bubble Boy? I don't know. Yeah.
Fantastic episode.
Yeah. So think of a virtual environment like a bubble. So you can do anything you want inside of that bubble, and it won't affect anything outside of that bubble or that virtual environment. And this is specific to Python, just the way it is. So the first thing we need to do, and we're going to cover this later, and you're going to be super familiar with creating virtual environments, is how do you create a virtual environment in Python? So the first thing I'm going to do is run Python-m. So I'm going to Python make a virtual environment. VENV stands for virtual environment. And I'm going to name that virtual environment. I'm going to name it general practice is you name it VENV just to make sure that's a virtual environment. But I'm just going to name it Tom's VENV, Tom's virtual environment. So I do that, and notice it creates this little directory up here. Don't worry about what that is for. Just this is what the virtual environment is. So now I've created a virtual environment, but now I have to actually go into the virtual environment to actually run and install third-party libraries and all of that. So in order to go into my virtual environment, I need to be within the same directory that this virtual environment, at least within the same directory or a child directory of this virtual environment. And I needed to run source Tom's VENV dot or /bin/activate. And watch right here, watch what happens when I do that. Notice how it says Tom's VENV, which stands for Tom's virtual environment. That means I'm within the virtual environment now. And I can do whatever I want. I can install all kinds of software and it won't affect anything else outside of this virtual environment. And the reason why we have virtual environments is because if I installed things just directly outside on my local machine, say I had one version of some library and I'm working on some other application that requires a separate version, maybe a newer version or an older version. There isn't a real easy way to go back to an older version. That's why I have a virtual environment, is because I can install all kinds of libraries inside of this virtual environment, and it only affects the code within this virtual environment. So I can create another application that has another virtual environment that might use the same library, but might use a different version of that. Questions about virtual environments, and we're going to cover this a lot later.
Where you create the virtual environment, like, so for example, on your first line in your terminal, you were in SQL-Python directory. Does it matter if you were out a couple directories and then you go in and then once you create it, or like, how does that work?
Your virtual environment should be in the directory that your program is located in. So I'm in a program called SQL Python because that's the subject of this lecture. So my virtual environment should be within my SQL Python directory.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Does the virtual environment that you have created inherit anything from the rest of your computer?
No, I mean, it knows that I have Python 3 installed in some things, but it doesn't inherit other globally installed modules or libraries. So I can run in Python or in JavaScript, we use npm install some library. Do you remember how we used to install some third-party libraries like Jest using npm? Where in Python, we use the keyword pip or pip3, which stands for, I don't even know what it actually, Python, I don't know, whatever, pip. So pip is the shorthand to install libraries in Python. So if I do pip list, I can list all the libraries that are installed within my virtual environment because I'm currently located within my virtual environment right here. So I can run that and you can kind of see what's kind of already installed, the package pip, setup tools. Don't worry about that warning. So I can clear that. I'm still within my virtual environment. In order to get out of your virtual environment, you can just run deactivate and watch when I run deactivate. Now I'm no longer inside my virtual environment. But if I wanted to see, I can run that pip list outside of my virtual environment, and you can see all the Python libraries that are installed on my local machine. And there's quite a few of them. These are all globally installed Python packages. And notice when I go into my, so I'll do pip list. So these are all the Python modules, third-party Python modules that are installed globally. Now, if I go back into my virtual environment, so I can do source toms, the name of my virtual environment, bin/activate. Now I'm located in my virtual environment, and I'd run pip list now. Now I only have 2 things installed in my virtual environment, which is good because now I'm like starting with a clean slate, my application. So to get back to running and installing third-party modules such as Psycopg2 to connect to a Postgres database, I can run pip install Psycopg2. And when I run that, it's installing Psycopg2 on my local machine. Questions as it's installing?
So none of my, whenever I put pip in front of everything, it just keeps saying command not found.
If you run
Is
pip
that a
3
personal problem? Oh.
Yeah, that, yeah, you might have,
Okay,
you might have to
I'll
install.
do it later.
Yeah, all right.
Try doing pip 3. instead of
Yeah.
pip.
Pip 3 might work. It's just kind of like running Python or Python 3. You're explicitly setting. So I installed Psycopg2. Now if I run pip list, now you can see Psycopg2 is installed within my virtual environment. So I'm here in the documentation of Psycopg2, and there's a few things we need to do. So I'm just going to actually copy this over. I hate the way this copies. So I'm going to run this up here. And I'm going to get rid of some of these items. So the first thing I need to do at the very top is import Psycopg2, like so. And the first thing I need to do is actually connect to my Postgres database. And here it says Psycopg2 connect to whatever my database name is and whatever the user name is. And this user is what your local machine is called. So whatever whatever your username is called on your local machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to connect to the database. And if I get any errors from connecting to it, it's going to throw an accept. So what I'm going to do is move all that up into my try accept block. If you haven't seen this try accept, this is a way of handling any errors. So what's going to happen when I execute this file, it's going to come into this try block. It's going to try to execute this code. If there are any errors in here, it's going to means it's not successful at doing doing what I want to try to do in here. So it's going to go down to this accept, and I'm just going to print there was an error. So if this is your first time seeing a try accept, just know that they're pretty common, and you'll start seeing these going forward as well. You can also put these inside of functions like def connect to database and put the try accept within there. That's common practice. You're going to see this going forward either in Python, and there's also an equivalent to that in JavaScript. But I'm just going to do it directly in here. So what this try is, it's going to try to execute the code within here. If it executes correctly, that's great. If there's any errors in here, we try and connect to the database, opening a cursor, whatever that means. If there's any errors, then it'll jump down here in this accept block, and I can display, hey, there was in fact an error. So what this connects is connection to Postgres database. So Psycopg2 connects to whatever database followed by the username. I don't know what my username is, but I know what the database name is. Does anybody remember the database name I chose to call? What was it called?
That's Platoon.
Was it Papa Platoon?
Platoon.
Papa Platoon. Don't know what that username is. There's a couple of ways you can grab your username directly from a file. You can import OS and you can print os.get. Is it get login? Like so. So I'm going to print the get login. I'm just going to run this file to see if I can get the username for my local machine. And don't worry, we'll run through all these other commands. So I'm going to run this class roster.python. And what does it say? Root. So it looks like right here it says get login. I don't know what this is. Syntax warning, ellipsis is not callable. Don't know what any of that is. I'm going to actually comment all this stuff out because none of this is probably working because this is probably where the errors are going. Yep. So notice how there was an error. It's because there was some error in here like so. But you see this root, that means that's what's being printed out right here. Username. Username is root, but that's not my username. My username is ta_preet. So there's another way you can do it is you can import get pass and run get pass dot get user. So it just depends. Some of you os.getLogin will work. Other people's the get login won't work and the get pass will work. So it just depends on.
You have get pass twice instead of get pass icon user.
Thank you. That's why it's. See, it says username root. That means it is the root user. However, the username is ta_preet, and I need this username to connect to my Postgres database. So this Psycopg2 connects to Papa Platoon, and so I can either type ta_preet in here, but we're Python developers, and maybe I want this, maybe one of you all to use it on your local machine. So I'm going to do some string interpolation, get pass dot get user, like so. So this connection should connect to a user or connect to a database named Papa Platoon, and I need this user to log in. And I'm assigning it to a variable called con, which stands for like connect. So let's actually run that. And let's look at this connection. Okay, it's a connection object. That means it's successful. That's great. The next thing I need to do is open up a cursor to actually execute commands on the database. So I first make a connection to the database. The next, I open up a cursor to allow me to make, or it allows me to execute queries or commands in the database. So I'm running connection, which is this connection object, and I'm running a cursor method on it. And now it's called cursor. Now I can execute commands by running cursor or curse, CUR, dot execute. And now I can actually run SQL queries on this database. So instead of running, let's create a table. Let's create a table students. And let's actually make sure, let's create table students. ID primary key. And now I'm actually running. What does this look like?
SQL command.
Yep, I'm literally just running a SQL command as a raw string, or not a raw string, but as a string in Python. So I'm going to create an ID of students. I'm going to make the name varchar. I'm going to make it 255. And we're going to do favorite foods. So favorite food, let's make it 255 as well. So I'm creating a table. I'm going to execute this on my database. And before I actually insert into anything, query the database. Yeah, screw that. I'll get to that in a second. But once I actually run commands or create a query and execute it on the database, at the end, before I actually need to close the connection, I have to run connection.commit, which actually saves this query actually on the database. So it actually, I need to execute it on the database, and then this connection.commit means I actually save that query to the database. So it actually executes it, or actually saves that table to the database. And once I save it, I can, after I'm done doing all my commands and queries and all of that, I can close the connection with the database by doing cursor.close and then connection.close. So I need to make a connection to the database. Step one, open up a cursor to allow me to execute queries on the database. I can execute as many queries as I need to. Once I execute those queries, I can save all of the data to the database or make any changes. I can actually save it. That's what this commit does. And then I need to close the cursor and close the connection. So let's run this. And if everything is ran right, we can see what happens. All right, nothing happened. That's usually a good sign. But now let's inspect, what is it, Papa Platoon? And now let's inspect that. Notice how I have a students table now. And let's inspect the students table. I've got an ID, name, and favorite food. That's awesome. Now let's actually save some data to it. So let's go ahead and execute some other things. So cursor.execute. So now I can insert into the students table. Let's do name and favorite food. So, yep. So I'm going to insert into favorite food, the values. Now this is, which is kind of interesting when you're actually executing. When you're running insert into, when you're inserting into the database using the execute, it can take in two arguments, the query and some values of what you want to insert. So typically we would add like the values, like name Tom, favorite food is, mastioli, something like that. But when you're using Psycopg2, we want to actually move this part over here as the second argument. And in place of the actual values, we want to use %s. That represents a string representation of whatever least favorite food is. And so if you have like a bunch of values here, you'll have the corresponding number of %s's. So if I quit that and clear the terminal and run this again, oh, whoop, that's not what I want. Let's run this roster again. Oh, it says there was an error. What do you think the error might be? This error should be a little more explicit as to what it is, but
Semicolon, line 22.
on line 22, I don't think I need one there because this isn't specific. It's not, it's converting this into a SQL query. So if I look here as an example, I don't necessarily need the query. But what is it trying to do? It's running this whole piece of code again. It's connecting to the database. It's opening up a cursor. It's trying to create a table. It's trying to insert
Creating a
that
table that already exists.
Yep, it already has a table already in there. So I'm going to create a drop table variable called drop table. If exists, students cascade. So I created a drop table variable, and I'm going to do cursor.execute, and I'm going to execute that drop table variable. So if I run that again,
Probably should be table.
You spelled table wrong.
Line 13.
let's run that again. Hopefully there's not an error. Cool. That's great. So now I can also do like student table creation query. And I'm actually going to move this to that. And instead of execute that raw, I'm going to do student table creation query. So if I clear that, great. Now I can actually check PSQL, Papa Platoon. And now I can do select star from students. And now you can actually see me actually inserting some of that value in there. And I can repeat that. I can do John, I think it's a sushi. Noah. Like so. Oh. Cool. And now, again, I can check. You can see everything in there. Any questions about that? About creating a connection, creating a cursor, creating variables of SQL queries, and then executing those variables and or executing insert into values. Just remember the insert into values right here. You need the %s sign that represents name, favorite food. Even if this favorite food is an integer or this value is an integer, it should still be %s.
I have a quick question. Yeah, going back to the beginning, when you import the Psycopg2, I'm getting I have a problem message where it's saying import Psycopg2 could not be resolved from source. You know what that is?
I do not know what that is. We can take that
Okay.
offline though. Yep.
Sounds good.
Is there any significance to the cursor?
This
Or is it
part.
just something we can do? Yeah.
So this allows us to perform actual operations. Like it allows us to run these insert into queries and actually run queries on the database. All right. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Does this have to be done in a virtual environment? Because for those of us on Cloud 9, I don't think we can do this. We're already in a virtual environment.
You should still be able to create a virtual environment.
I tried.
No.
And I know Brian tried to, because I reached out to him to see if he was able to do it.
Well, if you can't, then just install it globally on
Okay.
S3.
Do they
All right,
have
thanks.
virtual environments installed correctly?
I don't know.
For what, Cloud 9?
Yeah, because V&V.
Let's take this off. Hey, let's take this offline before. Yeah, let's take it
will do.
offline.
Okay.
All right. So that's all. This is all great, but like you're still writing raw SQL, so it's not like we're all still inserting all this stuff. So we're still doing a lot of the like tedious work of writing SQL queries, which is like the most monotonous work there is. But with that, I'm going to deactivate this virtual environment, and I'm going to CD up one level. And so let's say instead of just doing something this small, what if you're given a CSV file that you're like, all right, I've got this CSV file. We know how to work with CSV files because we did it a couple of weeks ago. But say, since you go to work at a small, real estate startup company, and it's just one realtor, but they're expanding drastically and they're hiring a bunch of realtors. And initially the realtor is only working off a spreadsheet, but they hired you as a developer to actually create applications so multiple real estate agents can access that application and access that data in a database instead of using just a basic CSV file. Or maybe you want to run some analysis on some CSV file. You want to store all that data in a database. So I'm going to create a directory just called real estate Python, CD into real estate Python, and I'm going to close that out. And what I'm going to do is your realtor person has a CSV file called, Sacramento real estate transactions. And these are all the transactions that this real estate agent has been, let's open this up into a new window. This real estate agent has been just using a spreadsheet to track real estate transactions. And he gives you this gives you the CSV file, and he's like, I want this stored in a database. So instead of writing a bunch of individual insert queries using Python or SQL, 20 of them, that's not that bad. But what if there's 1,000 of them? Or you extracted some data from Zillow for your zip code and you're like, all right, I want to store this in a database and do something with it. So I'm going to create a real estate .python. So because we have Psycopg2 and we know Python and we can read from CSVs and we know SQL, we can run a script that reads from this and store it in a Postgres database. So this real estate Python file can create a table called properties and read through each line in the CSV file and insert it into the database. So the first thing I need to do if I'm using Psycopg2 is create a virtual environment. So I'm going to do python-make virtual environment. I'm going to call this virtual environment also VENV. So I created a virtual environment right here. That stands for virtual environment. So it says, we noticed a new virtual environment has been created. Do you want to select it for the workspace folder? I could click yes, but I'm going to do all this in the terminal. So once I created the virtual environment, I need to activate the virtual environment. So source, the name of the virtual environment, my virtual environment names just happens to be VENV, bin/activate. So now this has been activated. Now I could import Psycopg2 by pip install Psycopg2. Now it's installing Psycopg2 again in this specific virtual environment. And I need to import Psycopg2. I'm going to have to import get pass because I need to have the user login to access the database. I'm going to be working with CSV files, so I'm going to have to import CSV as well. All right. So the first thing I want to do is let's create a new database. So your boss says, all right, we need a database to store this real estate information. So I'm going to call it create DB real estate transactions. All right, so I created a Postgres database called real estate transactions right there. There's no tables created. So I'm going to quit that. But now I'm going to try to actually connect to the database using Psycopg2. So I'm going to create a connection or connection Psycopg2. What is it? Connection or is it connect? Psycopg2 connect. I'm going to use the DB name. The database name is real estate transaction. And the user is get pass.get user like so. So I need to make a connection to the database. If that doesn't work, or if there's an error anywhere, I might get an accept and print. There was an error.
Hey, Tom, I have a question.
Yep.
On line 7, why'd you make that an F string?
Because I'm running, because this connection takes in a single string that has a DB name equals real estate transaction, followed by a user equals whatever the username is. So I need to extract the username from my local machine. So that's why, because it only takes in one argument. Yep. So again, there's 3 things I need to do. I need to make a connection to the Postgres DB. I need to open up a cursor to execute commands on the database. I'll need to save commands or commands/queries on the database, save the commands/queries to the database, and then close the cursor, and then also close the connection. So those are pretty much the, I guess, 5 things I need to do. So open up a cursor. I can write cursor equals connection dot cursor. And then finally, I can do cursor. What is it? Cursor, no, connection dot commit. Connection. Let's look at here, execute. So connection dot commit. Cursor dot close. And again, you don't want these probably to be the name the same. So I'm just going to do shorthand curse or CUR. Cursor dot close and connection dot close. And then within this block of code, I can write in between these lines, the cursor and the commit. This is where I want to execute all my code. So let's just, there we go. All right. So if I want to read from this CSV file, how do I read from it? Does anybody remember?
Be like with open. I guess you got to pull in the file name, right? So I guess it's going to be the path. So you'll have to get the path. Open, it'll be open parentheses and then path, but we're going to have to, create a variable for the path.
Yep, let's just with open, and I'm just gonna, this is located in the same directory, so I'm just gonna call it Sacramento real estate transactions .csv. The mode is an R for read. I don't necessarily need to add that because it defaults to read as CSV file. Like so. So I'm reading from it. And I'm going to make this a dict reader. Why is this throwing an error? Oh, so I'm going to do CSV reader equals CSV.dict reader and CSV file. And now I can do for row and CSV reader print, let's just print the row. So if I run this, Python real estate. So it comes into here, makes the connection, opens up a cursor, reads from the CSV file, prints each row. I'm not doing anything with the CSV file or with I'm not writing any queries or anything on it. It's printing all of this and committing, closing, and closing the connection. So great. I'm reading from the database. But so I've created this Sacramento real estate transactions database, but I don't have a table. So let's go ahead and create a table. So I'm going to create a method. Michael?
I just had a real quick question. I think I might have missed it. Is the CSV inside of the virtual environment, or is it sitting outside of the virtual environment?
So don't think of it as sitting within the virtual environment. I still have access to the CSV file within the virtual environment. If I get out of the virtual environment, I will still have access to the CSV file. So I'm currently within the virtual environment, but I still have access to the CSV file within the virtual environment.
Okay.
The only things that are located in the virtual environment are these modules or libraries.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to create a table for this. So when reading from a CSV file, I want to clean the data. I want to make sure that everything is clean before I put it into my database. But before I do that, let's go ahead and create a table. So I'm going to create table creation query variable. I'm going to do 3 strings. So I'm going to create table. I'm going to call this one properties. And I'm going to do ID serial primary key. What do I want to add to this table? So I can extract whatever I want from this. I can include everything I want in here, or I don't have to include anything. I can just pick and choose what I want to be stored in this properties table. So I want to store, notice how it says street, but here in my table, I want it to be street address. And I want that to be a varchar with a length of 255. The city, I want it to be a varchar of 255 again. Let's do zip code. So here it's just a zip. I'm just gonna, when I store this in, I want this column to be called zip code. And that's gonna be a varchar Let's make that a varchar. You can have it 255, but I'm just gonna make it 5. Let's just see if state varchar. Just for the hell of it, I'm gonna make it 255 just because. Here it says beds, baths, but I want to be explicit as to what that column is. I'm going to say number of beds, and that's going to be an integer. Same thing with number of baths. And instead of SQ double under feet, I'm going to make this square feet. It says type. I'm going to make it property type. Property type. Varchar. It's residential or condo. Let's just make it 20 characters long. Sale date. I'm going to make this a timestamp. Sale price. Instead of price, I want it to be integer. And then I've got latitude and longitude. Latitude. Whoop. This is actually gonna be a decimal. Latitude, longitude. Questions about this table that I'm creating? No.
So it seems that we're like combining a lot of the same information in one table here. And you guys kind of told us that, like, look at this through the lens of OOP. Would it be wise to throw all of that, like sale date, sale price, or kind of like break that off into a different table of like sale information?
Not necessarily, because yeah, you might. It depends on what your use case for. Like this, we're gonna want all the properties when we extract properties information. Probably want all this information like this because we're a realtor, so we want to know this data, what this stuff is. But if you were just like some other random organization that happened to have properties and sale data and some other information, you might break it off. But for our purposes, I think it's safe to say that all this could be in one table. Because the sale date and sale price is directly related to this individual property.
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
What if you were to disregard the latitude and the longitude? Would that be okay? Because it's headings in the CSV, but if you don't, do you have to include it in the properties when you're creating the table, or can you just?
You don't have to include anything. No, you don't have to do this. I'm just converting all this to a database. But when I read from the CSV file, I could extract only the data I want from here and store it in and like associate it with the columns in this table.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And we can run through that if we want to. So I've got a variable called table creation query. Once I open that, let's see. Let's also add a drop table if exists variable as well, because we might have to run this a bunch of times. So I'm going to do cursor dot execute drop table if exists. And I'm going to also run table creation query. And if everything works correctly, I should only get these rows printed out. And if not, we can see what happens. All right, nothing happened. If I do PSQL real estate transactions and do \D. I can see I've got that properties table. I can do \D properties and I can inspect them. Great. Now what do we need to do? So we're reading from each row. But now in here, what I have to do is create, add like the street address to a dictionary called street address. So I'm going to have to clean this data. So I'm going to have to convert like the street to street address. So when I do this insert into command, it knows what column to insert, what column for this data to insert into for my database. So I'm going to create a database, or not a database, a method called def clean data. And this clean data is going to take in a CSV row, and it's going to return a cleaned dictionary that's cleaned. So what I'm going to do is for each row, I'm going to pass each row into this CSV row, and I'm going to create a dictionary with all these columns as keys. So I can run cleaned, and I can literally probably just copy this down here. See if this works. I wonder if there's a way I can, oh, there we go. Create cleaned. No, it didn't work. Let's see. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to comment that out. So if I want to do the street address from the CSV row, I can run CSV row. Well, actually, before I do that, let's print the CSV row just to show you what that looks like. So I've got this method called clean data. I'm going to pass that clean data method, and I'll pass that CSV row into here. So if I clear that and run that file, I should get, not that. I should see all these printed off rows again, but that's being printed off. So I'm reading from the CSV file for each row in the CSV reader. I'm passing that row in the clean data. It's coming up here and it's printing that row. So now I can access the street address. What is it? CSV row dot street, because I'm looking at that. City, I can do CSV row. What is the city? It's pretty self-explanatory. Zip code, CSV row zip. State, pretty self-explanatory. CSV row state. Number of beds, CSV row beds.
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
If we have to transform any of this data, is this the time to do it? For example, I know our database is expecting like decimals for certain things. And if I recall, the CSVs pulling in just strings.
Yep.
Is that where we do the conversion here, where we would just say like cast it as an integer or whatever?
Exactly. So when we're cleaning the data, we're preparing it to be stored into our database. So we're cleaning this. to be stored into our database. So we're going to convert it to any type that our database is requiring for that specific column, and doing all that conversion here in this clean data method. So sale date, so CSV row. What am I doing? So property type, is it just type? So here for like the sale date, the date is requiring a timestamp. So what I'm going to need to do is import from date time, import the date time object. So CSV row, the sale date is sale date, but I need to convert it into whatever timestamp that looks like in Postgres. So if I do timestamp Postgres example, and I don't necessarily know what that looks like. So it looks like something like, I guess, this, like so. But that timestamp, there is a method called date time, which I'm using, and I'm doing strip time. And I can convert that into a specific format. So I can do, percent month followed by percent day followed by percent year. And if I run that, print cleaned, I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So now you can kind of see the date time is a date time object that looks something like this. I mean, that's what it looks like here, but when it's actually stored into the database, it'll actually it'll be able to be stored in the database. And same with, we got sale price. Is it just price? And latitude and longitude, same thing. These are decimals, and I need to store a decimal. So if I run that, so what I'm going to have to do is import decimal, or what is it, from decimal, import decimal, and this decimal takes in that CSV row, latitude, longitude. So if I clear that, sale price, but here the sale price, this might not work because I think the sale price is supposed to be an integer. So how do I make this an integer? I can just run int, maybe. We'll see what happens. But now notice how each key, city, state, zip code, state, number of beds, number of baths, square foot, number of beds, correspond to each column in my database. So I'm cleaning the data. So I can just say like, this is a cleaned row, and I can print just cleaned row just to make sure everything is still working. Clear. So each cleaned row, sale price, integer, decimal, object, great. Now what I can do, instead of here, I can run that execute. So cursor.execute And now I can do that insert into properties. Let's go ahead and insert into properties. This is where I need the, what is it? Street address, city, state, zip code, street address, city, state zip code, city zip code state, code state, number of beds, number of baths, square feet, property type, sale date, sale price, latitude, longitude. Then I can do values. And how many values does this need? This is one, essentially corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I'm going to need 11% S's. Percent S. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that's 11 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11. And this looks like here, cursor, and then the next argument is I've got this cleaned row. Now I can run, I'm trying to copy this over here. I'm passing in a tuple of cleaned row street address. So I'm extracting each value corresponding to each column in the database. So I'm executing this insert into a bunch of times. And if everything worked right, there was an error. What happened? Decimal, integer. Let's see. So there's an error somewhere.
Are your numbers in integers? Sorry, number of baths, number of bedrooms?
Oh, integer there, integer there. So let's see if that is it. So number of integers. Maybe.
I think latitude and longitude should be floats too if you made them decimals, right?
Let's see. What am I doing?
Hey, Tom, for the percent S's, I think you have 12 values instead of 11.
Really? Let's see.
As in, it should be 12, right? Instead of 11.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Hey, look at that. That might be one reason. Hopefully that is the only thing that's wrong with it.
I think property square footage needs to be an integer as well.
Square footage, square feet, integer, sale price, integer. Square foot, where the hell did that go? Hopefully that works. Not there. Cool. So a bunch of stuff happened. I'm printing all that stuff. So let's actually run that again. Cool, nothing happened. But now we can run PSQL. Thank you for helping me debug. And now I can select star from properties. And now you can kind of see, and that looks really ugly. Let's make this a little nicer. If I could do \x, expanded display is on. Now it kind of displays it a little bit easier. So expanded display allows you to view a really big table into each, almost like a different list. So you can kind of see how everything is in there now. So because I know how to code, I just ran a script to grab all this data from a CSV file, cleaned it. So I only extracted what data I wanted. So maybe I didn't want the latitude and longitude. So let's get rid of that, because who cares? I have the address. Google's smart enough to know what the address is. Let's get rid of 2 of these S's. Let's get rid of the latitude and longitude, like so. And run that again. Oh no, why was there an error? What happened?
Was it the original table wanted it still, or no? Did you get rid of it there too?
I think I got rid of it there. Anybody know why?
You still have the longitude and latitude there.
Oh, thank you. There. Get rid of that. Where else did I have it? Cool. So I got rid of the latitude and longitude just by
I
doing
think we
that.
still need to get rid of the %s though, right?
No, I think I got rid of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, I got rid of those as well. And you can kind of see by dang it. So I'm going to do \x turns the expanded display on. And now you can kind of see that the cell or the latitude and longitude are incorrect or are deleted. So when you're reading from the CSV file, you can run logic on that when you're cleaning it. So like maybe residential and condo, like residential condo. I don't understand why that's a type. Maybe I wanted to, instead of having it be condo, I wanted to display condominium. So I can say like condo equals condo. So I'm going to say literally condominium. Is that how you spell condominium? If condo else residential, something like stupid like that. Maybe I wanted to do that. So I'm running some logic that's changing the value. So now I can inspect that. Let's run that expanded display. So I've got residential. Did it all go back to residential? Condominium. So instead of condo, I wanted to say condominium in my database. So I ran some logic inside of the clean data, ran some Python in there to explicitly put what I want in there. Questions?
I want to know, is there like a way to, or are you able to debug this? Because like I noticed, like whenever you put like there's an error, it's not actually showing you anything useful.
I don't know if there's an easy way to do this one. try except, is it like exception? Let's just look at what they. Ankur, do you know? Usually I explicitly will say like,
You could do exception as E and then print out the E.
there you go.
And the docs talk about like if it'll throw a programming error or
Like
there's
a
couple of
value
conflicts.
error or a type error. I'm still not throwing errors yet. So I think that's more of just a input error, or when I'm actually executing that on the database. But yeah, I read into more of the try excepts. You can do a bunch of different type of exceptions errors. There's like type errors, input errors. There's just a bunch of them. But I just wanted to introduce you to like the try except block. But yeah. All right.
Tom, I'm sorry. On the virtual environment, when you do the source line, you've got the name of the virtual environment and then that /bin/activate. Like, is there any significance to that? Is that like a location? We just don't worry about it. It's just how it is kind of thing. Or is there some meaning in bin and activate that, or it's just is what it is?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the bin is for. I'm sure it's referring to something, but the activate is you're activating the virtual environment.
Yeah, bin, whenever we see bin, that stands for binary. It's a location in the virtual environment. So Tom, if you actually go into that folder, the virtual environment folder, it will, you can see a bunch of stuff that's in there. Again, you never need to go in here. You never need to mess with it, but you're basically running this activate command.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you never need to do anything within this virtual environment directory or anything. All right. So just remember.
I'm sorry. One more question about the try except. The advantage there of, and I'm just trying to understand the advantage of using the try except, because if we didn't have the try except and you had an error, we would still see the error. It's not like we wouldn't see the error when you tried to run it, but the advantage is your program will see the error, but it won't just like crash. It'll like keep running. Is that the idea? It'll like just give you the accept. And then like if some other stuff needs to happen, it can do that other stuff. But if we didn't have the try except, it would throw the error and then your program would just stop because there was an error. Is that right?
Yeah, the exception part is you get to determine how you want to handle the error and what you want to do when an error gets thrown. And then you can add multiple exceptions. Like you don't need one. Like you can have multiple exceptions based off of the type of error that's thrown. Like maybe it's a value error, it's a type error. Based on the type of error. So there's a bunch of, and then like there's also a finally. So this will always be executed at the very end. So just know that there is a try except block out there that you're going to be seeing more of. But if you're interested in it, I'd research it more, but this is just a quick introduction of it. A lot of languages have their version of a try except blocks. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.